Hi everyone. Welcome to another edition of Sci-Fi. We've got some branding now, Elliot, so we're getting serious just above your head there. There you are, that's it. Yeah, it's looking good. So thanks everyone for listening. And we also have a regular schedule now. So every Friday you can listen to our show, Sci-Fi, which talks to somebody working on or in psychoanalysis about politics, theory, culture, and so on. We've had some great recent ones with Jela Krecic and with Helen Rollins, Nina Power, Anushka Gross. Please check them out. And we're absolutely delighted to welcome today Julie Reshe. How are you, Julie?
I'm fine.
Good. And Julie is a theorist, a psychoanalytic theorist, and a writer. But you live in Ireland, do you, or you've just recently moved there?
I'm recently moved here because and it's very friendly environment for Ukrainians, and I'm uh, quite like it.
Great. No, I mean I like it too. And I'm happy you're there and all right. So are you from Ukraine or?
Yeah, I was born in Ukraine, and I graduated. I did my bachelor degree and MA in Ukrainian philosophy, and then I traveled around the world, including in Russia.
Right. So you've been sort of right in the middle. And I mean, and this is partly what we're going to be talking about. I mean, recently, I don't know how recently, but you've been writing about fascism, questions of using psychoanalysis to think about fascism and to challenge questions and ideas around fascism and anti-fascist discourse as well. And Hannah Arendt, other theorists as well. So we're going to talk about like what you've been writing and working on recently with regards to fascism, and also maybe talk a bit about what's been going on. Sound good?
Yeah.
Well,
Mm.
not good, but we're in this situation. So yeah, I mean, perhaps we could start by these. So these pieces that you wrote, such as the fascism in each of us and the blind spots of anti-fascism, they were published in Russian. But were you saying that they're coming out in translation soon in English? Is that the case?
Yeah, I'm thinking if I should publish it because it's too I don't know, not optimistic enough, probably. And I'm not sure whether the whole thing of negative psychoanalysis is required now, or if it's something more optimistic, what is required now. And I have trouble sustaining myself, the pessimistic views. It's
Hmm.
I used to be good in that, but now.
You're
Well,
negative
tell us.
about the negative. Oh no. I've heard about this.
I mean, tell us what negative psychoanalysis is, and then maybe we can talk about why you feel it's not the right approach now, or it might not be. Like, just give us an idea of how you see negative psychoanalysis, what that is for you.
Well, simplistic understanding of it would be something in opposition to positive psychology, self-help, something affirmative, something that just wants to fix individual, make them feel better psychologically, and this is simplistic one. And negative psychoanalysis would be less optimistic, uh, not hopeful at all. Would be rather recognizing depressive and anxious sides of life, and would see the tragedy of our existence as substantial, as something that is required, as something that you can't just simply avoid, and other problems with positive psychology approach and the generally influence of psychology. And I think the world currently challenges it itself. I mean, my work is not done, but I was telling that this could happen.
Yeah. So in terms of your readings of fascism, let's think about that in terms of negative psychoanalysis, I guess. Like so, in I mean. I don't know which one to sort of start with, but I think the points made in the fascism in each of us is really interesting here. That we live in a society which uses fascism. Of course, it's right and necessary to combat fascism, but it's become rather more a kind of signifier for what is good. And I really liked a quote that you from your piece on the blind spots of anti-fascism, where you say to be good today and to assure your goodness is to be actively anti-fascist. So you're sort of identifying here that something's happened in the discourse where taking on the anti-fascist stance has sort of become the yeah, the sort of only acceptable go-to, and it sort of purifies yourself or your idea of yourself. And it makes the fascism takes the fascism out of you and puts it somewhere else, right? Which, whereas your argument, the fascism in each of us, is that in some way every human being necessarily has a kind of fascism within. Would that be an appropriate summary, or am I getting it wrong?
Yeah, it would be, but I need to say probably that the way I use word fascism is not historically, well, I use it as it's now used in public discourse, the way people use it when they accuse each other in fascism, or they accuse a certain group of people, certain nationalities, for example, Ukrainians in fascism, like completely detached, not completely, but detached from historical context, as something to designate non-abstract actual evil. And so my point was and is that well, I don't think I might say that each human is evil, that we are evil, and there is nothing we can do about it. And wherever we're fighting for something good, this is the most dangerous point when this evilness can be revealed. So I can say that each humans as such are evil, but I don't believe it. I think it's even more tragic. I think they're very good, genuinely good, but this is the problem. This is what justifies their evil, and it's like the vicious cycle of us manifesting genuinely our good side, and it's turning into the most evil side. This is why I was trying to even show the humanity of Nazi Germany, humanity of Hitler, because it's not someone opposite to us. It's actually someone who resembles us, but it's the goodness that it can be seen as the goodness that went extremely wrong. And the terrifying Putin side, we might not believe his speeches where he's referring to Bible when he's talking about love to Russia and justifying what they do currently with the most moral things. It's easy to perceive it as not genuine something, as he just pretending, but in the core, he is evil. It's much easier perspective. But what if it's true? What if it's actually? And I know that Russians to know about Putin, maybe there is more hypocrisy there. But I know that there are Russians who would actually genuinely see themselves as good in supporting the most terrible thing. And this is the terrifying part. So it's easy now to say that this part of war, and this is what I internally do just to exist, we have to do it. We have to perceive that we are on the side of goodness, and there is good part, which is Ukraine and which is me, right? And there is a terrible evil people who are against me or a certain group of Ukrainians. But if you think on a larger perspective, what it's required hating, dehumanizing a certain group of humans, Russians, for example, and there is new word for Russians who support Russian attack against Ukraine, racist. So we basically call them fascism, and this is how we feel good. Me too, by the way. So and to be good, there is this dark side of my goodness, and the dead end. To be good, to feel good, to do the right thing, I have to become someone technically a fascist myself, and I'm not sure if there is the end. So my solution was way before than when I was writing about fascism in all of us, this Deleuze and Guattari and Foucault idea that there is something in each of us, and we have to first of all pay attention to fascism in us, recognize it in us, instead of like we normally do to feel good, we see it in some other people, and we feel good by recognizing, by fighting it outside of us, by seeing, and we delineate ourselves from someone evil, someone who we call fascist. We protect ourselves from our goodness, from seeing it in our goodness. But it basically how we become, this is the blind spot, this is how we become. By protecting our goodness, we become terrible people technically.
So it's kind of like this. I'm sort of also reminded in what you're saying of this phrase that sort of did the rounds, the inhumane war, like calling this war inhumane. And I'm getting this from a really great talk by Bara Kolenk that where she was talking about this phrase recently, where, but basically similar argument to yours, that in calling this war, inhumane, ultimately what's happening is that we're saying that there's a separation between the human and the war, or in your case, there's a separation between the fascist and the human. So, one thing becomes good, the other becomes fascist, and so on. And I think that's, whereas in fact, what you're saying is that there's something particularly good and something particularly human about these things that we're witnessing, right? So, and if we recognize that, it becomes a much bigger crisis in a way, because we have to look at ourselves and the humanity and goodness that we think constitutes us, right? And think about how that could potentially lead to fascism and so on, rather than seeing it as a kind of other that has nothing to do with us, right? The pure and the good on the one side, and the fascist and the evil on the other. Is that
Yeah,
right?
but currently this perspective, so that was my hope before, that we will all recognize that there is a danger, be maybe more careful with who we are, with what we are, to what extent what we are ready to do in the name of our goodness, what terrible deeds. For example, if we saw someone murdering other person, we will, and by protecting this person, we'll kill the murderer, and we'll feel this is just going to
Right.
prove that we are good, right? But so this trick, uh, but now it's dangerous, and it used to be dangerous. For example, if I would recognize, like I am, that to a certain extent because I'm human, I'm a fascist, but I'm expecting from other people to recognize same about themselves, that they are fascist too. But no, they wouldn't. They would just say, yes, you are, finally we found the evil, and you're supposed to be punished. This is because people are looking for evil where they can locate it, so they can practice their goodness. And for example, Ukrainians would recognize when they were accused in being fascist, and still are by Russians, which is completely absurd. But for example, they would recognize that they are fascist, and it won't happen so that Russians will recognize that we are also fascist and going to live happily ever after. No, they would just claim, yes, you are, we told you you are, and you're not supposed to exist now. So this hope is, it's hopeless. That it would only work if each of us will reckon, and it won't go away. It'll just mean that we need to be careful. We need to doubt ourselves. And now it's in circumstances of war, when someone is actively attacking, you can't do it anymore. You because it suggests more reflexivity, but actually Ukrainians are in position, which is also a tragic position, to be good, to protect their country. They need to technically kill others, kill a certain nationality who is occupying this country. So it's also problematic goodness, right? To be good, now you are in a position where you're demanded to kill certain type of people. That's what is terrible about the war. So the problem is in the world, that we kind of see facing impossibility, problematic position of it's harder to be good. It's harder to preserve illusion of absolute goodness. Well, it's maybe not harder. To a certain extent, it made, especially at the beginning of a war, it made war more world more optimistic. But but now when depression kicks in, when there is it's not that optimism, but enthusiasm of support of Ukraine, of Ukrainian people. And now when after, especially after Bucha, after those terrible monstrosities were seen, so there is no possibility of a happy ending. You won't redeem those lives. You won't redeem those people who are killed, people who and the whole reality that was discovered, presented to us. The world will. There is no way that Russia will gain a victory, because the victory is on the side of Ukraine by definition. There is a future. It's not. There's a future in the behavior Ukraine demonstrates. So this is a victory. But on the other hand, the victory is impossible, because you can't change. I mean, there is no matter who is winning the war, the things that were done, the realities about other humans that were revealed, you have to live with it. You have to somehow.
There's no cancellation of the tragedy. And I think that is kind of the dream, right? It's like when we beat the Russian fascists, then the tragedy will be canceled somehow, but it's not, right?
It won't.
Yeah.
And every day is it 62nd day of a war. You know, it's more and more tragedy that is visible, that it's harder to. We keep persisting by hiding the tragedy of life, of other humans, of ourselves, and from ourselves. But in this circumstances, it's harder to hide it. Even though I appreciate a lot the cooperation, solidarity between Ukrainians and how world supports Ukraine. This is an amazing thing that is happening on the basis of the recognition of a tragedy. And this is what I like a lot. The actual cooperation that kicks in when people recognize the tragedy. But the fear is that it's too much for cooperation, because there is the quality of human psyche that when it's possible to help, the tragedy is recognized. There is a support, there is cooperation in pain, and I think that's the most beautiful part of humanity. But it's also when it's too terrifying, if it's so terrifying that it's impossible to help, the cooperation collapses, because even we prefer to sustain ourselves, to survive. We prefer not to see that tragedy. And you can even test it in your life. If you have some problem that are solvable, other people will help you. But if you have real terrible problems, or something, for example rape, or something that is uncomfortable to talk, people will just stay away from you. They won't, psychologically, they won't be able, most of them, to recognize it, and the solidarity collapses. So not to reach this point where the tragedy is too much. It's supposed to be enough to sustain collaboration, cooperation, support, mutual support, but not too much, when just because the reality is so shocking that we are not able to support this reality, and just prefer not to ignore it, basically to survive.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. Yeah, no, it's a really important point. I mean, I wanted to ask a little bit more about this question of anti-fascism, which is you were just talking about, and in your writing here, because I think it's really interesting. You mentioned that Ukrainians are being called fascists. This happened when the war first started. You suddenly got this kind of confusion. Who were the fascists here? And it kind of shows, and I think what you're making out of it is really interesting, that what we might think of as the left, or actually progressive, communities in the West, have picked up this tendency to, accuse everything of being fascist. And you actually think about this in psychoanalytic terms, writing about the anti-fascist gaze, and how this becomes a kind of paranoia, right? A paranoiac gaze. So I wondered if you could say, I mean, I don't know if your opinions have changed again since on this point, but I think it'd be great if you could explain what you mean by that, by thinking about using these kind of psychoanalytic terms of the gaze and of paranoia to think about how this kind of progressive anti-fascist community that defines the other as fascist and itself as good is kind of structured.
Yeah, I think it's after the World War, Second World War, people, the most favorite topic of discussion was fascism, and how to prevent it, and how to how to sustain goodness that is possible to sustain. But it kind of has a dark side, precisely in this blind spot, that it's not precisely when you are trying to figure out the sources of monstrosities, the sources of evilness, when it was revealed, in my view, that human position as such is tragic, is evil, and what humanity is capable of. And because of it's impossible to, because of this absoluteness of this evilness, and it's hard to allocate the source of it. It's hard to sustain an illusion that there is a certain maybe psychological deviation, a certain obedience level to which level people are ready to obey. So to certain structural problems. And the deeper you think, this intellectual thinking that tries to solve a problem, the crazier you get, the more paranoid you get, and you try to technically reveal it in everything because it's possible, and everyone can be accused in fascism. I know that because I used to be accused in it many years because I'm Ukrainian,
Right.
with the Russian propaganda of Ukrainians, and I was accused in it because I was too positive, and then I was accused in it because I'm too negative. So for both, there is no way out. No matter what you do, if someone wants to find evil in you, they will find it, even
Well,
if
yeah.
there's
Well, to delineate
peace.
is, is to not confront the real. You're saying confront the real. Don't do endless symbolic paranoia. And it's like, oh, you're evil because you're too positive. You're evil because, this is all non-confrontation with the real, which was
Mhm.
another thing you wrote about, right? Psychoanalysis is kind of like to confront the real and to confront tragedy. And this is exactly like the major weakness of popular discourse today, right? We don't really confront tragedy. We everything becomes a positive story in some capacity, right?
Well, it's supposed to be you can't confront the real. That's called evilness, right? Or something terrifying. Uh, because you still have to preserve illusion of positivity, of some kind of goodness, if you can call it that way, in other people. But when in circumstances of war, this perspective collapses, and the social bond, which is based to a great extent on illusion, maybe it shouldn't be positive illusions. It also has to collapse. But on the other hand, to sustain it, we are again too readily jump into illusion of delineation, who is good, who is evil, without when there is no possibility to reflect maybe deeper anymore. And this is where the terrible things start, because, for example, Russians now have stigmatized all the Russians, just in case, are stigmatized as evil, and all
Right.
the Ukrainians are stigmatized. So it's simplification, because precisely in my view, because we're confronting the real, the evilness, the problematicity of human beings, and we, to compensate for it, we need to really quickly jump into more simpler delineation, and it's not the solution. But ideally, what negative psychoanalysis tries to do is to see the real, the tragedy of human existence, to confront in certain way the tragical side, and to learn to exist within understanding yourself to a certain extent as potentially evil, and other as potentially evil. And this is the actual social love, actual social bond, because if you love a person, if you exist, if you form a social bond, because you have illusion that others are good, or there are some good others, there are bad others, you don't see yourself as bad one. But it's not actual love, it's based on illusion. You don't see the other, you don't see monstrosity of the other. The actual social bond is when you recognize other as the lack, the real of the other, the terrifying real of the other, and you are able to sustain it. This is where you actually connect with others through your maybe tragedies, their tragedies, through sadness and anxiety that goes with all of that. But again, if it's too much of it, just it's supposed to be some gradual process. It could be too much when we just
Well,
stop.
yeah, the ideology is so thick that prevents the recognition of the lack in the other, right? It is such a big ask. It's not a big ask, but it's a big jump from, I would say, like day-to-day Western or just world ideology, really.
Mhm.
But I think it's a great psychoanalytic point about the way ideology functions in today's media society. The point that I guess I'm making it in a not such a powerful way as you, but that in order for something to be a tragedy of the day, it almost sort of has to fall between two parameters. It has to be tragic enough, but not too tragic. Like existing within this space where it can be processed and so on. Whereas there are sort of tragedies outside of that, which are just, as you put it, kind of getting ignored or sort of partitioned off and from the discourse entirely, right? Would that be right?
Yeah, so maybe what I'm referring to, the example is a cancel culture. And
Mm.
I can't, even if those are different phenomena, Russia trying to cancel Ukraine, but still, there is some similarities with Western cancel culture and this process of, where something is designated as evil and you destroy it, and you perceive yourself as good, as something that practicing goodness by trying to destroy a certain part of reality, social reality, certain country, certain nationality, or in the West, certain kind of people who we designate as bad. They're just bad, we are good, they're cancelled, and we preserve this goodness through this process. And but and this the opposite process of that would be recognized as recognition of the tragedy, the terrifying side of each of us, and maybe it even gives it gives the space where people, space of what Kristeva calls space of forgiveness, where people can change. They're not just, you don't perceive them as substantially neither good nor bad, but the space where they coincide with their luck, where they can, with the real of themselves, with their basically non-existence, painful one. But, and this is the space where we can, I think, genuinely exist with each other. And I think that it's not that much about, yeah, it is about just enough tragedy, recognition of tragedy, uh, but and not for tragedy to go away, just recognizing that it will stay there. And here maybe Bataille idea and my idea is similar to his, that we are, he, Bataille is war, we are war. War is, something that in certain interpretation is something that happening all the time. This tragedy is there, destruction is there all the time. We're destructive creatures, tragic creatures. But the problem with war as it is manifested is that it's destruction that is aimed at final destruction of a certain type of people and self-preservation by this destruction. So and there is other more human, genuine type of destruction where it's also self-destructive. When you doubt yourself, when you feel the pain of other, when you sacrifice yourself to other, not only destroying other, acting as someone who destroys other and destroys at the end the humanity, when it's kind of maybe tragedy is too intense, it's embodied in too intense way, or at the same time you preserve yourself from the tragedy, you just impose it on others and you're destructive in that way. So the solution would be the balance of this destructiveness, a certain type of pro-social destructiveness where you sacrifice yourself, destroy yourself in order to support other, when you listen to other, when you shut up and listen to other, understand other, and forgive to a certain extent other. So I think it's tragedy, it's always going to be like that. Other and people are terrible at the same time, especially when they're good, and they are destructive, but there's supposed to be a certain type of destruction that include self-destruction for us to survive for a little longer, even though humanity as species are going to extinct, and each of us is going to die.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
No,
go
but
ahead.
one of the things, sorry to be flippant, I can't help myself. I'm from California. That's sitting there. I'm delineating. I think one of the scary things that you confront in kind of by reading your work, and I am trying to shut up and listen because I'm not under the illusion that isn't my main task here. But I mean, the kind of scary thing is the non-guarantee. If we can't delineate, then we can't be the good guys, and this is like a terrifying possibility for our identities and our egos. What if I am not simply good guy? What what if confronting evil in ourselves is such a difficult ask of ourselves, let alone kind of other people. I don't suppose you have any tips about how we can confront evil in ourselves.
But I have a tip: just confront it in yourself. But this also it's painful to recognize that you're not absolutely good, and that there is no way to be absolutely good, that you never know that things you are trying to do will not be not turn out to be evil. And we can question every type of help, of support, especially support in psychotherapy. Is it actually helpful, and what does it help? We prefer not to question it. And is it, maybe it's actually damaging, or maybe it's your your illusion that you're helping someone, you feel good, and that you're actually damaging other by doing this, which I think to great extent psychology, psychotherapeutic help does. But it's very dangerous to question it, because there at the end there's going to be no space where you can feel your goodness, when you can preserve the illusion. But I still think it's to a certain extent the right thing to do. And it's not that we stop doing everything and just question our every kind of support we can, and just question our goodness, and confess in our evilness. It's the trick is to be hopeless, to understand that every good you do is questionable, but at the same time you have to do it. It's even more tragic. You have to be pathetic, and you have to be you have to try to be good, but at the same time be ready that you won't, that every good thing you do is questionable, and this is the human condition. Without it won't change. And I think it's the best option, the maximum you can do. You can try to be good, but you'll never be, and at least you can recognize it.
I think that's a great answer, because another of the things I was had highlighted here to sort of ask you about was this statement that there's a naive hope that humanity can kind of cleanse itself from evil and keep only goodness, and that's a lot of what we've been talking about, right, with the structure of anti-fascism and so on, and this desire, this kind of paranoid desire to be good and not evil. And you say evil is not the opposite of goodness. Much more often the former is an excessively extreme version of the latter, or level of the latter, so that evil is an extreme version of goodness. Now this is really provocative, and you've already kind of explained it, because you described that in terms of this war, for example. It's not the opposite of those of us who are not in Russia and who are good, but it's a kind of extreme version of our own culture, and fascism can be seen in this way. But I was also going to ask, so in that case, like, is it, it's not an excuse though. You can't simply just say, well, we're all evil, so therefore these things happen, these wars happen. So I think that was a great answer for that. And I was also thinking about this way in which people seem to criticize good deeds, right? Almost from the progressive perspective. For example, philanthropy. Now, Marxists criticize quite rightly philanthropy, because philanthropy is really only happening because the states and the global systems are and the structures that are there are so failing to look after the population, that philanthropy is necessary, right? And that could be local things like food banks. It could be sending humanitarian aid to the Ukraine. But what you just described seems to get around this problem, that, yes, we need to do those things that are good, but they are kind of imperfect good, or whatever. Like, we still, of course, need to do basic things we consider good, like some philanthropy or humanitarian work, whatever it is. But we also at the same time need to be critical and understand that this is I don't know, how would you put it? I'm trying to sort of get to what the point you were kind of finishing with, that we have to do this, but we must also kind of continually interrogate the problems with what we're doing, or the fact that it's not pure, that it isn't the solution, that the tragedy remains.
Yeah, the sustaining tragedy, maybe the sustaining the tragedy, that no matter what you do, and you have to do it, you have to try to be good, you have to try to support, you have to try to maybe preserve goodness, but be ready maybe for that you will fail at the end, that you will never occupy the position of absolute goodness from which you will be allowed to destroy others who are you allocate as good. And there is a danger precisely in our desire to be good, to preserve goodness, because if we don't see it in ourselves, we allocate it in others, and we allow ourselves in the name of this goodness to destroy them, to without questioning, because we perceive ourselves as pure. But maybe be more moderate in our and it's quite Christian perspective. I don't like it, quite orthodox. That
It's a different lesson, though. Recognizing evil in ourselves to know ourselves as sinners is a bit different than saying, "Oh, because Christianity says, oh, we can be the good, we can be like Jesus as the ideal, and we can be like Jesus, and we can give, and then we're good, and then we're humble." But this is like quite a different
that's the Christianity without the
right?
hope for redemption, without a happy ending. But you still have to do it, not because there is the hope for you to become good, there is a hope for heaven or something like that. There is no
Right.
hope, so you still have to do it with no rewards.
So, I mean, before, I mean, before, as we sort of come to an end, I mean, you started, Julie, by saying that you actually feel like an ethos of hopelessness, a hopefulness, is more not necessarily appealing or needed, but appropriate for this moment, rather than the negative psychoanalysis that we've been sort of maybe focusing on. So, what did you mean by that, and like how would you reflect on what's kind of required right now, and why did you say hopefulness is the sort of order of the day or whatever?
Yeah, well, I feel that what I was trying to do before the beginning of war, and I know that wars were happening, but it's wasn't something so close to me, something that is for me too real, too much of reality. And what I was doing before, I was trying to preserve the feeling of tragedy with my ideas, was practicing negative psychoanalysis to preserve the feeling, the space of tragedy, the recognition of tragedy. But now the reality does it instead of me, and I just feel like I'm weak human who is trying to survive and who is trying to, including, support my family who is in Ukraine. I can't, just don't feel strong enough at this moment. It was a luxury to a certain extent to be on the side of tragedy, to be strong enough to be pessimistic. Now I'm hopefully for not forever, too weak to sustain pessimism even more. Maybe world is too weak. It's too much of it's just kicking in without my help. So I'm partially on vacations now, but
that,
hopefully it will change. And and for the world and for me. It's going to be, we will be able to afford luxury, just work naturally in different circumstances to preserving tragedy, not through this too muchness of obvious tragedy.
But
Recognizing it ourselves, and instead of world just imposing it on us.
Isn't tragedy already there, though, in terms of, I think, one of the great things about negative psychoanalysis is, it can hold tragedy, right? It's not like I I disagree with you about yourself. I think you're right, in that, like, one of the things that sticks out to me in your writing is that we think of we're being negative instead of positive, right? And this is are we making an existential choice for negativity or pessimism over optimism? But I think one of the things that really stands out is that when you do kind of stick with negativity, it allows us to hold that space for people that are experiencing the tragedy of war, the overwhelmingness of war. And I've heard some stories from people dealing with the war in Ukraine, and it is this kind of like group trauma, this group kind, everyone has the stories and they're talking to each other about their stories. And that, I think negative psychoanalysis is that, it is kind of, like you said, this is the beautiful thing about humanity, is it can hold it's not tragedy instead of positivity. It's tragedy instead of like the void, right? Because this is, this is what ideology does, is it takes tragedy and it kind of opens up a void, and it's like, okay, we can delineate time. Tragedy is here, and now we're now, and now I'm dealing with something better than the tragedy. But this is precisely like what we can't do, because we've been exposed to the tragedy, right? The trauma of the tragedy. I'm talking from a secondhand account here, and like I understand that the trauma is overwhelming. I think there is a big question of what do you do about the trauma of war. There is no single right answer, right? I mean, it makes sense to kind of question this or that approach to try to somehow address this massive trauma of war. But
Yeah, I
yeah.
think that it's supposed to still be not too much, because for me it's currently too much as for human, and even my training is not enough to sustain pessimism, to not to jump into some positive illusions too much. But I think it's supposed to be like the training, like the army, people supposed to be trained. And I saw negative psychoanalysis and maybe this space of training, of sustaining tragedy, all the negative effects. But again, as with the army, you can just it's not existential choice that much. You can make this choice, but it requires some transformation. It requires some work, maybe with other person within the group, or with just by yourself. But when it's just too much, people tend to do opposite. They tend to jump to preserve themselves into some positive, simplistic illusions, run away from the reality. Like if someone, the relative person you love, dies, you will, no matter how atheist you are, you will start to think to just preserve yourself that there's afterlife or something like that. You will meet them just because it's impossible. So there's supposed to be some process, maybe transformative, the space of this transformative process too. And when it's too much, maybe just so again, it's the luxury not to jump into simplistic illusions and to sustain it. And now not sure we can afford this luxury. Maybe in the future we will.
Yeah, I really am convinced by the point, I think, and I really like the idea. And it goes back to what you very first mentioned when we started talking about how your work came out of an opposition to positive psychoanalysis, positive thinking, this kind of stuff. Actually, it's the reverse of what you'd assume. The positivist discourse takes hold at the weakest point rather than at the strongest point, and you need a strength to go with the negative. I think that's a really nice way of putting it. I did just want to ask one last thing about what you said about, this phrase you used a couple of times in what we were just saying, that the world is kind of doing it to itself, so, and is it maybe that, the negative approach here isn't so much needed because the ideologies that are sustaining us right now are already so weak. They're already undoing themselves, so is there a moment of hopefulness in this crisis? I suppose I want to ask that actually this does seem like a moment not only of tragedy in the sense of wars, which we've had before, but of the hegemonic ideology really kind of undermining itself and cracking up. So do you see like a hopefulness in that for a kind of future after it, or do you think that the ideologies we need to oppose will just take hold again and get control of our way of thinking? Or
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I see hopefulness, that I'm hopeful. I rather see maybe hopefulness in hopelessness, because ideologies are positive, right? And they are collapsing right now. It can cause the paranoia, it can cause the simplistic jumping into even more positive something. And this training, the negative training, is required for us to know how to live without ideology, without any positive, being hopeless, more hopeless. I'm not sure it's a hope, it's rather hopelessness, but it's beyond to a certain extent ideology as a positive project as something positive and something that artificially unites people. In my view, the actual genuine social bond is the hopeless, with more, it goes with more hopelessness, with more tragedy, more ability to sustain pain, your own pain, pain of others, and more hopelessness about your own goodness and the goodness of the world.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I mean, it's thanks so much for taking time out to talk to us during your enforced and probably quite horrendous so-called holiday or break. And hopefully all your friends and family are all right. But obviously we're thinking of you and stuff. And thanks so much for doing it. I mean, our listeners, I think, will be really interested in this. We've been doing it. It's a relatively new thing Elliot and I've been doing. I think this will be our sort of 6th week or something, and we haven't talked about negative psychoanalysis at all, really. And it's been a really important time to do it, to talk about fascism and negative psychoanalysis in relation to what's going on. So I think we're really grateful you've come on and shared with us your perspectives on it, Julie.
Thank you, both of you.
And what just before you go, what can people read this? You mentioned this is maybe forthcoming or something. If people want to read stuff from you, where should they go and find out more? Just
the Philosophical Saloon recently, and I'm not sure if I'm going to publish yet my text.
There's a great piece in the Philosophical Salon that Julie did a couple of weeks ago, and everyone should check that out if you want to hear more. So, okay, great. Well, thanks so much for doing it, and all the best, Julie. And hopefully, we'll catch up in a better time in the future.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
If you enjoy these videos, you should click on the subscribe button and click that bell. You should also consider supporting me on Patreon. Patrons get access to a second behind-the-scenes Parrot Room discussion where we dish out gossip or go into the weeds on topics such as the tendency of the rate of profit to decline, imperialism, and the critical theories of Tiffany Brissett and Donald Most. You'll also get access to both the public and private version of the revised Pop the Left series with Ashley Frawley and Pascal Robert, and the new Zoomer Philosophy series. Your support will not only make content like this possible, it will also help to establish a new publishing venture through Diet Soap Media. Right now, supporting me on Patreon will make a big difference.